This video is not intended for children. It includes references to violence, drug and alcohol use, and frightening situations. Viewer discretion is advised. I was in my early 20s and living in London, UK with some fellow students. Most of us just got into the culture of myths, shamanism, nature magic, and stone circles. One fine autumn, I felt the need to get out of London for a few days. I had very little money, so I hitchhiked out of the city. And at the end of the day, I was in beautiful countryside not far from Oxford. I was heading for the Ridgeway, an ancient trackway that links many ancient sites in Oxfordshire and Wiltshire, and which terminates or originates at the huge prehistoric complex of monuments set around Avebury. My aim was to spend a few nights under the stars at some of the ancient sites of Middle England. I spent the first night in a cemetery of Bronze Age barrows. In the gently sloping hillocks all around me slept the warriors of centuries past. I slept under a tree snuggled up close to a small campfire. On the last day of my little trip, I reached a prehistoric burial site called Wayland smithy. It is a great chambered tomb, roughly 5,500 years old, that now sits in a beautiful grove of beech trees. Built of great slabs of rock and a long mound of earth, it's fronted by an impressive facade of standing stones. Behind these massive stones, there's a cave-like structure made of larger stones. There's a short covered passage, and then you can climb into the side chambers where the bones of the long-lost dead were once laid to rest. It's like being in a cave with massive slabs of rock forming the walls around you and the ceiling above you. The stones are set into the earthen mound so that the inside of the tomb is quiet, cool, and still. I had arrived late afternoon. There was still plenty of people around and a couple of hours of daylight left. A little way off from them, I made a small fire in an old fire pit. As darkness approached, the throng of visitors died down to a trickle. Soon, I would have the site to myself. I waited on as the darkness thickened. Stillness and silence descended all around my little campfire. Only now did I make my way back to the tomb. By now the night was getting chilled, but still no wind stirred. I lit a small candle and entered. I crouched silently in one of the chambers. It still felt peaceful and enclosed. The candlelight lent the scene a certain fairy tale quality. Every once in a while, I heard the sounds of bits of earth falling to the ground around me. At first, I ignored it, but it carried on. I looked all around, but I couldn't see what was making the noise. It was like leaves crunching, or the pattering of tiny stones worked loose by some invisible agent. One moment to my left, then to my right. Whatever they were all around me. I started to rationalize. I decided that they must be little critters in the burial chamber, most likely a harmless sort of bug. It was starting to get spooky. I was attentive, even a bit apprehensive. I listened and looked around, starting to strain my senses. That's when it happened. Standing before me, right in the entranceway to the tomb, was some kind of creature. What I could only describe as a gnome or dwarf, even though it wasn't what I had expected from seeing pictures of them in fairy books. Standing about 2 feet tall, it had a large and very round head with a small face which was entirely covered with the tiniest of wrinkles. It appeared baby-like and very old all at once. I couldn't be sure of its gender. It seemed more male than female, but that's as much as I could tell. Its body was small set and skinny. Its clothes were in drab, earthy colors. The only notable part of its attire was its pure white pointed hat. It looked like it was made of brushed wool. It seemed soft and smooth, so perfect in its conical form. It stared right at me with intelligent and curious eyes, as if asking me, "What are you doing here? You humans really are strange." It stood there before me like that for what seemed like a few seconds. I could feel its presence as an independent, sentient life form, as aware of me as I was of it. Then I blinked my eyes and it was gone, never to return. A short while later, I made my way out of the chamber and slept peaceably by the fire for the rest of the night. I have come to believe that this creature was not bounded by my sense of time, nor my notions of space nor place, or the very conception of material form. It taught me that there are portals that lead from our familiar world to utterly other realms, and that these dreamlike realms are full of life and myriad wonders to behold. That experience remains one of my fondest glimpses beyond the veil. This happened in the 1970s. I was on holiday in Cornwall with my family. I think I was about 13. We'd been on holiday in Cornwall before and had joked about the little people who lived in the tin mines. I think we'd also bought souvenir Cornish piskies in the past. The first proper day of our holiday, we went for a walk on a clear, sunny day. It was very rural. I remember we were walking down a grassy track with large banks of wild hedges running alongside. It could have been somewhere near Palpero. I'm not sure. I was walking a few steps ahead of my mom and sisters, excited about having a whole week off, when I saw a gnome sitting by the side of the path. It was so unexpected. I think I remember feeling scared or wondering if I was seeing things or going mad. I took another couple of steps and I saw his nut-browned, wizened face in detail. He was cheekily grinning at me. He had a mossy brown gold beard and dark brown shining eyes. He was wearing a peaked hat, brown, that wasn't sticking up. The point rested on his shoulder, and a shiny jacket and trousers in shades of brown and ochre, natural wood leaf colors. The material looked shiny, not wet, just like shiny old leather, I think. I can't remember shoes. I'd say he was about 12 to 14 inches tall. I literally could not believe my eyes. I was even too amazed, dumbstruck is apt here, to turn around and tell my family to look at the gnome by the path. Then the gnome cocked his head, again cheekily, turned his back on me, and kind of changed or melted, transmogrified into an old tree stump. This must have all happened in a couple of seconds, just as I found the breath to say, "Mom, look!" But of course there was nothing to see but a tree stump. I felt really stupid then, so I muttered something non-consequential as we walked past. I was almost panicking, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. I was quite shaken. It was a breathtaking experience. It seemed so silly, and I felt so silly that I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Yet I really believed I had witnessed a spirit of nature, or a gnome, or something. But I also felt stupid, like a trick had been played on me, and I had fallen for it. I felt like the joke was on me, and the gnome was having a good laugh about it. That being looked real, and of this earth, but out of place in my reality. I didn't feel wholly in awe. I felt confusion at what I was seeing and disbelief. Whatever it was, I think it was some kind of nature spirit, a being closer to the earth than we are. This happened in Ireland, in County Meath, in the early 2000s. Some friends and I had gone to visit a well-known prehistoric cavern said to be a holy place of the Tuatha De Danann. It's a mysterious and magical place. The entrance of the site aligns perfectly with the rising sun on the winter solstice, when, on this one morning alone, sunlight illuminates the normally dark inner chamber. We were exploring deep inside the cavern in a chamber with a large carved bowl or basin from thousands of years ago, when I noticed a small drop of blood dripping down my forearm. I assumed I had scratched myself or else that I had been bitten by something. Feeling embarrassed, I wiped the blood away and, not even thinking, touched the bowl with my bloodied hand. In that same moment, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Blood has been exchanged." I spun around thinking someone was standing behind me, but no one was there. I thought maybe I had imagined it, but it felt so real. I had goosebumps all over and a chill ran down my back. I didn't tell any of my friends because I thought they wouldn't believe me, but I stayed close to them after that. When we finally emerged from the cave into the full light of the afternoon sun, I was able to better inspect the scratch on my arm. I found 2 huge digs on 2 different places on my arm, deep enough that I don't understand how I didn't feel any pain at all when I received them. Now, years later, I have 2 separate scars on my arm that to me look like runes in the exact places I received those scratches. I don't know what they mean or why I ended up with these marks when none of my friends did. That voice I heard gives me the chills just to think about. And it makes me wonder if these scars have marked me in some special way. Like maybe I've entered into some kind of deal or bargain without even knowing it. It makes me worry that one day, whoever, whatever gave me these scars will come looking for me and demand something I can't or don't want to give. I am 38 years old and live in western Pennsylvania. I've always believed in the fairy folk, and ever since I was a young child, I've been interested in all things otherwise deemed mythological or legendary. I kept my interest to myself for the most part, yet above all of the old stories and creatures I've read about, it's been the fairies that secretly intrigued me the most. In mid to late October of 2015, I decided to go visit and pay respects to both my parents and grandparents, who are buried beside one another in this cemetery not far from where I live. This cemetery is one of those that has no headstones, rather flat placards that are even with the surface of the ground. When I approached my grandparents' marker, I removed the built-in copper flower vase to clean it off, and to my surprise, noticed a tiny black widow spider that had made its nest there within the hollow cylinder compartment. Later, I shared with my 4 young kids what I had seen. My second oldest son, who just adamantly loves all sorts of bugs, insects, and spiders fearlessly, was more than eager to go back there, hoping to at least try to see that black widow. So later that week, I returned to the cemetery with all 4 of my children. I had given fair and wise warning to all of them to avoid disturbing the spider, It's known to be one of the more venomous spiders in North America, after all. They were only to admire it and watch it respectfully. I put on some thick gloves and removed the copper flower vase from my grandparents' marker once more. To our disappointment, the spider was no longer there. Just an empty web remained. So we paid our respects to my parents and grandparents and headed out. As I drove on the road that led out of the cemetery, my second son suddenly shouted, "Whoa, what was that?" I asked him what he had seen. "I don't know, it's some type of little red animal running through the cemetery," he said. I slowed the car, trying to see whatever he was seeing. Then my third oldest son and daughter both chimed in that they had seen it too. "Well, what is it, guys?" I asked them. "A little red bird? A chipmunk? What are you seeing?" Now, I know chipmunks aren't red, but all three of them were getting more and more excited by the second. I turned the car around and headed back towards the cemetery to try and spot what they had seen. All the while, my kids were growing more and more agitated. I slowly drove my car around the paved, winding cemetery road, all the while asking my children all sorts of questions. The responses I was getting from them were clear, concise, and consistent all the while. "It looks like a little red man. He's dressed all in red, and his skin is red too. He looks like a person, but he's very short, old, and ugly looking." I couldn't see what they were seeing, and neither could my oldest son. And at a certain point, I began feeling like the butt of their joint effort joke. My oldest son kept repeating that he could not see what the other three were claiming and was growing slightly annoyed by what was going on. I found a place to park my car. My oldest son stayed inside while I and my other three got out to investigate. But when we got out of my car, their attitudes and demeanor changed from curious to frightened very quickly. They all pointed towards something I couldn't see. But from what they were saying, I was able to put together a good mental picture of what it was. It was very short, maybe a foot tall. He had red skin and was dressed all in red clothes as well. The only part of him that was not red were his old-style shoes, like a leprechaun's or pilgrim shoes, which were black with a silver buckle on the front. He had a cone-shaped head, or was possibly wearing a hat that was shaped like a cone. Either way, it was tapered and curled forward in a downward point. He wore a belt around his coat, carrying a type of club. His face was ugly and old-looking, with the demeanor of a nasty and hateful person, with a really long nose and chin. He acted like he was confused as to why we were all looking at him, and presented himself in a way that he wasn't afraid of us, but just wanted to be left alone. Soon after my kids had given me this description, they all gasped and said a second fairy being had arrived. This one, they claimed, looked a lot like the first one, except it had what appeared to be a tail. After a good 20 minutes of this encounter, my kids were getting very upset and scared. It was like these two creatures were not afraid of us. Part of me wanted to leave, while another part wanted to stay and hopefully see whatever they were seeing. This is where I made my mistake. I should have just left. Both my second and third oldest sons were then attacked. My second oldest had 3 scratches drawn down the back of his calf, and my third oldest was either pinched or bitten. The red marks were there. We all saw them come out of nowhere. I was very freaked out. I began to pray for protection as we rushed back to the car. As we ran, my second oldest was shoved by an unseen force and fell to the ground. Luckily, he was not severely injured. We left that cemetery as fast as I could handle the road leading out. When we got home, I had my 3 draw pictures of what they had seen to the best of their abilities. I had them draw separate from one another, so they couldn't converse and discuss amongst themselves. All three pictures pretty much look the same. To this day, I don't know what they saw. I did extensive research on the internet about fairy lore. I thought they could have been gnomes or maybe clericons, imps, or even far rigs. I've even seen multiple descriptions and drawings very similar to the ones my children drew from all over different parts of the world, none of which were said to have been all solid red or seen in a cemetery. I was then and still am now left very confused about it all. Why were they there? Why at the cemetery? What was their business there? Why were my two sons attacked? I didn't summon them or invite them. I don't even practice anything New Age or occult. And what, if anything, did they have to do with the Black Widow's spider I had seen? I'm left with only questions and no answers. I was on a bus on the way home from work when I found myself unable to get up for my stop. Maybe I had started to fall asleep and was in that space between sleep and wakefulness. Either way, I felt this strong sense of paralysis come over me, and though I wanted to, I couldn't move. The feeling ended soon after, so I shook it off and decided to get off at the next stop. The next stop was in the next village. A large field stretched from there all the way back to where I lived, so I walked back on a path that ran along the edge of the field. It was early evening and the sun was out. There was an old thorn tree in the field, right next to the path. As I walked past it, I saw something come out from behind it and start walking behind me. I turned around immediately, but there was nothing there. Whatever it was had either hidden or disappeared, or else I'd imagined it. But I was almost positive I had seen something. I kept going, and as I walked, out of the corner of my eye, I kept seeing this thing walking behind me. But whenever I turned, there was nothing there. I started concentrating on my peripheral vision because that's where I was seeing it. And to me, it looked like what you would expect a classic gnome to look like, except for the hat, which wasn't conical, but what looked like a flat cap made from dark brown leather. He was around 2 feet high, and his body and clothing were all dark brown and leathery. He kept following me all the way back to my gate, when again I turned around and again found nothing. After that day, I noticed this gnome being many times around my home, usually out of the corner of my eye. I only became convinced of his reality when I finally saw him straight on one day. He went over to our cat and stroked him, and the cat responded exactly as if a person had stroked him. So I wasn't just imagining it or seeing things. This thing was real. Since then, I have seen other strange, bark-skinned figures emerge, seemingly from the trees in my area. I also once saw a man in the forest who looked like a classic Green Man figure, who up until then I had considered a mere metaphor. I do not consider myself psychic, but I am a druid and have spent a lot of time in nature and lived my life with respect for it. Maybe that's why I've been allowed to see these beings who normally keep themselves hidden. I was staying at a cottage with some friends in Somerset, England. Late one night, we all decided to go on a walk on a nearby woodland trail. My friends had gone ahead of me. I was enjoying the night air and the sounds of the woods and wasn't really involved in their conversation, so I straggled behind. Pretty much alone now, I started to notice it was getting quite misty and that the mist had a weird glow to it. The further along the trail I walked, the mistier it got, until I started to worry I might get lost. Everything then got very quiet until, rising out of the silence, I heard what sounded like a bell ringing. Not quickly, but slowly. I stopped to try to figure out where the sound was coming from, and right in front of me, walking inside the mist, was a small procession of what appeared to be fairies. They were around 3 feet tall, holding lanterns. They looked like normally proportioned humans, except shrunk down to a smaller size. They seemed to be wearing medieval-style clothing in gray or earthy tones, though at times their clothes were covered by the mist, and it was hard to tell. I stood there and stared at them, and they seemed to notice me but made no moves to approach me or to hide themselves. They just continued along in their procession, and it was like I had come across a parade or a sheep or duck crossing, and there was nothing to do but wait until the procession had passed. Now, I have never taken drugs, and I had not had any alcohol that night. I was not feeling sleepy or ill. I was completely alert, healthy, and awake when this happened. I don't know how to explain it. It was the weirdest experience I've ever had. The procession lasted maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and then the fairies disappeared into the mist, and I couldn't see them anymore. I continued down the path, rushing to catch up with my friends, but I couldn't find them. I went back to the cottage and found my friends already there. Apparently, they had all been worried about me since they lost me in the woods. They claimed I had been missing for around 45 minutes. But to me, it felt like I had been separated from them for 10 minutes at the most, and that's stretching it. Very, very strange. Before this experience, I had an open mind, but since then, I've really started to wonder what sort of beings we share this earth with. These ones I saw felt like earth entities of some kind, definitely fairies. I have since read about them in academia and philosophy. I think that the mist that I saw might have been some kind of portal opening up to another world. Maybe in that world, those fairies tell stories to their friends about that night in the woods when a mist appeared and they saw a human. Thanks for watching. As always, extra special thanks goes out to all my supporters on Patreon. I love you guys. Thank you so, so much for your support. If you like this content and you'd like to support it, please check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. Even $1 really, really helps and is very much appreciated. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census. Thanks to everyone who submitted their stories. Some of the stories from the census were edited to make them more friendly for narration, but if you want to read the originals, the link to the census is in the description. Let me know what you thought about these ones down in the comments. I'll be there commenting and answering questions for the next hour or so. I'm always collecting your true fairy encounter stories in the meantime, so if you've got one, don't be shy. I'd love to read it. Please send it along. My email is in the description, and that goes for fairy art as well. If you have any to share, email it to me and I'll post it on my social media channels. Don't forget to comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new, and hit the bell to receive notifications. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.